Dragon Quest is a series that in a perfect world would not require an introduction, but this isn't one. The Dragon Quest series started as a way to adapt the late 70s and early 80s computer role-playing games of the West to a console market of Japan with the Famicom. It would be a misnomer to say Dragon Quest was the first Japanese role-playing game, but it was the first to really hit the mainstream and take over the country. The success was aided by the work of Akira Toriyama, the manga artist known for Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, who was basically prodded into doing monster designs for the game, which in turn led to this being mentioned in Weekly Shonen Jump. It gained traction immediately after this. Sure, the game's limited sprites didn't do Toriyama's art the justice it deserved, but even in this very limited state, the enemies were appealing to look at. The slimes especially took off as a beloved mascot. They're all you see in the beginning and they're just so cute, and most importantly, even someone like me can draw one. The first entry was very much a first entry, but it still has its charm. Which is my way of saying I don't really care for the first Dragon Quest, but I respect what it started. Sequels obviously came out, and these early ones were about as revolutionary as the first. Each added new mechanics and features that we take for granted. The second game gave us more playable characters and more complex battles to go alongside it, as well as a much larger map and even a boat. I just like boats. Everyone already sucks off Dragon Quest III, so I'll keep it short, and I'll just say that by this stage the series proved to be a huge juggernaut and not just a one-hit wonder. More sequels kept being pumped out, as did remakes of the games, and most importantly we were graced with many a spin-off. My favourite of the spin-offs would be the Monsters series, which expanded upon Dragon Quest V and to a lesser degree VI's Monster Training. These were a series of initially Game Boy titles where we just raised monsters and used them for battles against other monsters. Wonder why it didn't take off in the West? Oh well, at least Japan likes them, so much so that they hide some of the best games from us. Side note, but Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3, yes that's the full name, is one of my favourite JRPGs, and if not my favourite Dragon Quest role-playing game of all time, easily top 3. It's still a Japan exclusive officially, but add that to the list of games that you're playing at the end of this video. A more important spin-off of Dragon Quest was also made around the same time, which was Mystery Dungeon, which was initially exclusively Dragon Quest focused, but then they gave it to some other franchise. If you're noticing a pattern, it's that a lot of the Dragon Quest spin-offs just don't come to the West. And relevant to that, we were gifted with the Slime Mori Mori series, known as Rocket Slime here, because the one and only time we were graced with an official localization they called it that. The first game was only for Game Boy Advance, the second for Nintendo DS, and the third for 3DS. I'm still awaiting a Switch entry. This slime sub-series sees us playing as a slime, no surprises there, but here in Rocket Slime, we play as a slime called Rocket. Stop me if I'm going too fast. He's a young slime child who just loves to play with his slime friends in the idyllic Boingburg, the capital of Slimania. Everything is going great until they're invaded by platypunks, which are not only cute but a word autocorrect hates. They're like every species here, an iconic part of the Dragon Quest series, and now we get to see them as more than just mindless human-killing enemies, or trainable monster-killing friends. Now we get to see them willingly commit war crimes. Specifically, we're against the Plob, which is run by the Plob father, Don Corleone, and his associates with equally as endearing names and designs. But I just can't be mad at their kidnapping or the fact that they're shooting at a kid, because they're just so cute. In fact, this whole game is. This is one of the most charmingly friendly looking games on the DS. Everything is so bright and vivid, and the animation's really smooth. This whole trilogy has the same feel, because they barely change the visuals each time. These aren't games that push the limits, but instead they're just so cute, and that's all we need. This is a kind of head-empty game, but I mean that in a loving way. This game has plot, it has a lot of writing, but everything is so tongue-in-cheek that it doesn't expect to be taken seriously. Every line of dialogue is basically a bad joke that is given by a character whose name is a bad pun. This goes as far as the credits, calling the staff things like the Slimers, Coordinators, and Producers. Even when we unseal Flucifer from the flute sealing him, The game isn't anything but a farce. Can a game this cute and colourful be anything but fun? The answer is obviously no. From beginning to end, this is a simple and effortlessly endearing game with issues so minor they can be easily ignored most of the time. Movement is so fun. Sure, we can move around normally and do little jumps and turn into longer hover jumps, but who cares? We stretch and we bounce. Look at him go! And since he's an armless little guy, we need to stretch and release to hit objects or enemies, and then we can catch him while they're momentarily in the air. They can be stacked, and once you master this, you've basically mastered about 90% of the game. I never said it was hard, but it's just so satisfying. The only real issue with the controls is just that we're locked at 8 directions, and this is controlled with Nintendo DS's D-pad. And both of these are satisfactory ways of playing a game, but it feels more stiff than I would like the slime to be. But still, it's something you easily adjust to, and it becomes a non-issue after enough time. Things are broken up into a few small stages, each top-down and open, but still with a beginning and a general endpoint. Fast travel warps and climbable ropes to skip over large sections are unlocked once you've gotten to them, so you never have to make the full trek whenever you come back. So it's fair to say your first time or times through any section, basically until you've unlocked the fast travel skip, it'll be a set of largely linear areas that are effectively disguised as an open playground. And then once you've beaten the level and revisited, it just becomes an open playground. Levels generally wrap around in a way that would be easy to get lost in, but we have a map at all times on the top screen. I can only imagine how much of a godsend this would have been to fans of the original single-screen game. This is one of those games that really does make such a big difference being on a 2-screen system. Perhaps that's why we didn't get a 4th game yet. Basically, the goal of the levels is to rescue the kidnapped slimes, who are all conveniently in treasure chests, and you'll send them back to town by carrying them to some of the tracks or the rivers that flow back into town, and you have to throw them onto the abundant carts, courtesy of a Trans-Limerian railway. But if that's all you're sending back, you're not playing the game right. You have to strip these areas of their resources and wildlife, fling materials and other monsters back to your town, because they are needed for the other half of the game. More on that soon. If someone put a gun to my head and demanded I compare it to another game, even though it's a disservice to say that they're too similar, I'd not argue the value of that and instead just say, it's kind of like a bouncy version of the top-down Zelda titles, and just hope I'm not shot. The similarities are there, including our ever-growing amount of hearts which represent health, or the countless treasure chests we open. The perspective aids this, and the screen is full of enemies that we easily defeat. But the comparisons kind of end there. This isn't really a Zelda title, but in this era of every game being compared to another, I just need folks who hate RPGs to know that this Dragon Quest title isn't an RPG at all. There's several Dragon Quest spin-offs that aren't RPGs, please play them, they have cute slimes. This is the gateway game. We introduce you to this, and then 5 years later, you're playing Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 Professional, with your imported Liquid Metal Slime 2DS. But I can't just skirt away with saying it's nothing like Zelda without explaining further, so here's further. The other half of the game is basically a giant mech combat, and it somehow fits in seamlessly. I know I was skeptical at first. The same gameplay is used here. We still bounce and stretch around. The core gameplay of carrying things is used here near constantly. Basically, your mech and the enemy mech, which are always given wonderful names, battle it out while stationary and just staring each other down. It's all very symmetrical, with the enemy tank largely having the same layout as your own, though there are sometimes noticeable differences. Both you and your opponent have 2 cannons on the top floor, and they fire at 2 different altitudes. It's all effectively communicated on the top screen, which shows both tanks, every projectile that's launched, the health bar of both vehicles, and the locations of you and your enemy's individual units. It starts off incredibly simple, with just worrying about launching stones to lower their health, but it turns into quite a bit more. All the materials we gather are used in the crafting system here, which is basically the Dragon Quest VIII alchemy pot. In fact, this game has quite a few references to 8, which are all appreciated, But with this, we make not only much more powerful ammunition, but we can also make shields, weapons with different effects, and other things to destroy enemy projectiles within the splash zone. We can even equip Slime Knights, which are used for much more traditional moments here too, since they can attack with their sword. The Slime Knights especially excel for when we go inside their mech to infiltrate and internally sabotage everything, though they can do that to you as well, and it just makes it much more exciting. For almost every encounter, we choose up to 3 others to join us. They're initially just some of the slimes you rescue, but this does open up to other enemies in Dragon Quest if you collect enough of them during the main game. They usually, but not always, have 2 different behaviors, and you can change them on the fly. Usually it'll be something like fire at the enemy and infiltrate, or keep the enemies out and steal their ammunition. Generally speaking, they'll fight for you and die for you, only to be resurrected shortly thereafter. It can be an efficient strategy to just keep killing the enemy soldiers, and that means your AI buddies have free reign to attack from your own mech. Infiltration is just as effective as actually using your own weapons, even if it probably violates some rules of war. The mech gameplay is the most fun the game gets, but also having too much of it would probably overstay its welcome. That's why the rest of the game is here. When you get bored of playing slimy Zelda, you get a mech, and before you get bored of that, you're back to exploring. The pacing here is always perfect, and the fatigue never sets in, unless you're the kind of person who deliberately plays this in the least effective way possible, just to prove me wrong. The progression of a regular game is great too. We get more and more foreboding locations. We start in a generic grassy plains, later we do a scary mountain, and by the end of it we're on the enemy's airship. No 2 areas really feel the same, and they even change a bit as time progresses. We have a really nice day and night system, as time is basically progressing whenever you're out in these levels. It can change some small things, but most importantly, it just makes everything more cozy. We can even see the Platypunk sleeping, and I love it. The only thing that would make these non-mech sections even better is if they had bosses. Good thing they do, and these are all creative encounters that make the most out of its absurdist movement system. If moving in an empty field is fun, then you won't believe how fun it is to use these same systems to dodge platypuses shooting their guns. And they even go to the effort to show us the boss's health bar, which helps convey damage on this small screen with relatively small sprites. If you can't tell, I adore this game, so now let me bring up its flaws so I don't seem blinded, and then I'll praise it a bit at the end so you can come away with a positive view of this fantastic game. Wanting to upgrade your mech and its ammunition can be tedious and it can ruin the flow, especially if you want some late game monsters as your crewmates. Basically turns into back and forth trips between a spawn point and the nearest railway track, and this does get old fast. And since ammunition in your tank doesn't count as available ingredients for the crafting system, it's a slow task of removing all your ammo, filling it with the plentiful stones since we can't actually have it be empty, crafting new things with a full inventory, and then taking your new inventory back to the mech, even though most of the items will be the same as before. The option to craft with our current loaded ammo would have been fantastic. Also, I kinda wish we had more fun bosses, and more fun platforming sequences that require the hover. Honestly, I probably wish the whole game was longer. Okay, that's enough criticism, back to praising it. The story is so delightfully absurd and unimportant here, but my favourite part is the edgy anti-hero slime named Slivel. He shows up a few times and talks to Rocket with so much angst, doesn't feel like any actual attempt at seriousness. Part of the joke since Rocket doesn't talk or seem to emote, or really do anything other than bounce and play, and comes across as a wonderful juxtaposition. He helps keep the game world alive, as does the town we're rescuing. It goes from a completely desolate place after the attack to thriving, all thanks to our efforts. And it really does feel like that. It's all incremental and it doesn't feel artificial, outside of the one time when we magically fix every bit of destruction of the buildings and roads. But even then, that feels more so like a reward for getting that far. At the beginning, the town is basically just a place to save and mess around, but eventually it gets a store, the aforementioned crafting area, and all the different inhabitants bring their own fun dialogue and sometimes extra small optional quests for the player. My favourite optional side content here is the mech competitions, where we do increasingly hard fights, and it eventually ends with one of the best fights in the game. Without the side content, I was thinking, it's a shame the battles didn't get more challenging until near the end, but no, here were some of the best mech combat sections, and it's all optional in case you're one of those people that somehow doesn't like this part of a game. It doesn't force itself upon you. Though I imagine the game wouldn't be for you if you hated such an important chunk of it anyway. Oh yeah, and there's also local multiplayer here for some more mech antics. It supports download play, so go at it, but be warned. The number of people that have a DS entered down for local multiplayer of Dragon Quest Rocket Slime is a very small minority of people. This is the part of the video where I give you some kind of conclusion that wraps up everything. But instead of doing that, I'll just tell you how fun this game is. It's cute, and most importantly, it's really fun. Also, the sequel on 3DS is too, but if I say that too loudly, Nintendo will get mad, cause that's implying that I am endorsing piracy and hacks. So I'll just end by saying Rocket Slime for DS is great, and its sequel is potentially even better, even if we're not allowed to know about how great it is.